Every year, I make the 1,500-mile pilgrimage from my home in Virginia to the plains of East Texas. There are just some locations on this planet that hold a special place in my heart. Texas is one of those locations. It's one of America's remaining wild places, in more ways than one. I look forward to returning there every year just to experience the atmosphere that is the Lone Star State. It also helps that that place happens to be filled with monsters. I'm Master Angler Josh Dolan, a dedicated and hardcore big fish hunter. I travel and explore waters far and wide, devoting my life to the adventures and thrill of chasing true giants that swim. I've spent the last decade fishing hard to learn the ways of these monster fish, and I'm here to share my experiences with you. Join in my journey as I go to the extremes to hunt down, capture, and film the largest fish that each species has to offer. This is Have Rods, Will Travel. Deep in the heart of the southern United States, East Texas is a pretty unassuming place. 2 hours north of Houston, 2 hours south of Dallas, the proverbial middle of nowhere. The place of massive expanses of ranch land and ghost-like oil wells that work round the clock, slowly and methodically pulling the black gold from the ground. Life here is pretty straightforward, and yet people from all over the globe travel here with hopeful optimism of finding one of the world's last remaining dinosaurs. East Texas is not only the home of longhorn cattle and Lone Star beer. It's one of the final strongholds for a 100-million-year-old creature with a menacing smile, the freshwater giant known as the Alligator Gar. I just took a stroll down to the water real quick to check everything out. It's my first time being back on a Texas riverbank since almost exactly 1 year ago to the day. So came down here last year, did the whole Gar thing, and we're back to do it again. It's just crazy. You know, you never know where life's going to take you, and you never know where you're going to end up in this world. So to actually be back here walking along just this dry, muddy Texas riverbank is really special to me, just because you never know if you're ever going to make it back to any particular place. And you never know where time and you never know really what time in life has in store for you. So it's really cool to be back here. This place is unlike any other. It's absolutely, just straight up Jurassic Park. The fish are crazy, big, toothy, mean. The environment is unforgiving. It's a really harsh place. It's a really hot place, really humid, just straight up unforgiving, but it's so cool to be back here. I'm getting nostalgia just being here, For me, being back on a Texas riverbank is a breath of fresh air, and cruising up the Trinity River is like seeing an old friend again. The Trinity has helped forge me into a legitimate trophy fisherman, someone who takes pride in taking the difficult path and chasing the class of fish that is the smartest, the most elusive, and the most dangerous. I took the plunge 6 years ago and came to this place alone. Just myself, my gear, some cameras, and a kayak. Relying on myself to survive in the wilderness for a week and hunt down one of the largest freshwater predators on the planet. Ultimately, I was successful, and I've been returning to this wild waterway ever since. Although the Trinity feels like an old friend, I'll actually be teaming up with a friend in the flesh. My good buddy Bryan Thornton has helped me out on all of these adventures since my original trip in 2014. We could easily hire a guide to do all of the heavy lifting for us, but Bryan and I choose the more difficult option of taking on the challenge ourselves. Even though the risk of failure is high, we take pride and pleasure in the hardship and potential reward of making the trip happen on our own. On our first day, we head full throttle upriver to a stretch where we've had success in the past. Large alligator gar can be elusive and difficult to locate at times, but the species overall is abundant and it isn't hard to find juvenile fish, as we were soon reminded.
dude we got off the bank didn't even really roll the cameras forward. He's just kind of a little rat alligator gar.
We picked off a few fish to break the ice on the trip. I've never had a journey to Texas in which we landed a giant on the first day. Usually they make you work for it, and suffering is a currency that is widely accepted in the harsh landscape that is East Texas during midsummer. A currency that you must pay to earn your trophy alligator gar. The 710-mile-long Trinity River is split by a massive body of water known as Lake Livingston. The 1.75 million-acre lake is the second largest in the state of Texas and a major water supply for the city of Houston. It is also home to some of the largest gar in the world. We begin our next day on the upper end of the lake, where the river flows in and creates a unique ecosystem resembling something of a swampy Louisiana delta. Every direction you look in, you see a new species of plant or animal. Giant elephant ear plants lining the water's edge, and roseate spoonbills flocking to the trees resting on their sides, displaced by one of the biblical floods this area has seen. We waste no time cutting up the carp for bait and setting lines in hopes of getting out in front of a giant, cruising along the river channel's edge. That would be our only decent fish of the day. We landed a few other small ones, but we left the lake with more to be desired. The next day would be our last, and we would have to give maximum effort if we wanted to find another Texas trophy gar before we closed the book on this adventure.
Alright, so obviously I look a little different now than I do in the rest of this episode, but we didn't get a tackle segment filmed on location, and I didn't want to exclude it from this video. So we're in my fishing headquarters right now. I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the gear and rig we use for the alligator gar. That way you can learn something from this video and hopefully apply it to your own fishing and catch your own alligator gar. So to start, we have the reel. Now you can use either big spinning tackle or conventional tackle. I prefer conventional, and I go with the Siegler Reels LG, stands for large game. I have it threaded with 100-pound Power Pro, and the main reason I use this particular reel, it's made in Virginia, so am I, but it's a sturdy reel. It handles big fish under pressure, and it has a large line capacity. So this has a couple hundred yards of 100-pound Power Pro on it. And that's your main thing when choosing a reel. You want something that's sturdy, but you want that line capacity. When you're fishing for these alligator gar, you got to cover a lot of water. So you set your rod and reels up 100 yards or even more from one another down a bank. So you want something with a lot of capacity. That way, if a fish comes in and picks up your bait and takes off with it in a hurry, you're not going to get your reel dumped. You'll be able to have enough line to get to that reel, pick it up, and start fighting it without having to worry about anything. So that's the main reel that I use for this stuff. Super great deal. I pair that up with just a Big Cat fever rod. Just any standard stout reliable heavy duty rod, catfishing rod, big game rod. I choose the Big Cat Fevers. I use them for the blue cats here on the James, but I've also used this particular rod for the white sturgeon in the last episode and the alligator gar in this one, as well as that reel. So everything here will handle pretty much any sort of big game fishing, big game freshwater fishing that you want to do. White sturgeon, alligator gar, blue cats, flatheads, all that stuff. So that's the rod and reel I use. Siegler reels, 100-pound Power Pro, 7-foot Big Cat Fever rod, heavy action. It'll throw up to 16 ounces, I believe. And you want something that's a little bit longer, that way you can chuck those big baits out there if you're casting them out. That is the gear we use. Now for the rig, we just have a 1 to 2/0 bronze treble hook. Now you don't want stainless steel, you don't want nickel plated, you want the cheaper stuff. You want the bronze hooks. This will allow you to clip this hook if you need to. It'll allow you to cut this hook off in the fish, and because it's bronze and it's a cheaper hook, it'll dissolve and break down and rust within that fish, and the fish will eventually be able to pass it. And you know, something like a nickel plated or a stainless steel hook might stay in there for a really long time, could potentially kill the fish down the road, and that's not what we're about. You want something that'll break down, something that'll allow this fish to keep living on, and something that'll help the conservation aspect of this fishing. So that's a preferably 1/0 treble hook, and I have that rigged up on some 130-pound single strand Malin wire. And there's the hook, there's the swivel, just a standard barrel swivel, and that's all attached with the haywire twist wire knot. Super easy knot to tie, something that you can look up online and learn pretty quickly. I highly recommend that you do that. And that is just tied to our 100-pound Power Pro mainline. That is threaded through a cigar float. And then there is your bead and your bobber stop. Now, you see the float, you think you're suspending these baits, but you're not. We're putting these baits on the bottom. You want your bobber stop to be double the depth of whatever you're fishing, and that allows the fish to pick up the bait and take off swimming, and eventually the line flows through this bobber, or this cigar float, hits that bobber stop, and then your float follows the fish. And that's the main aspect of this entire rig. This helps you keep track of where your fish is going. It's not suspending your bait's sitting on the bottom. But this is allowing you to know what direction your fish is going, if it's heading to some thick cover, some fallen trees, a lot of that wood debris that you find in the Trinity River and the Brazos River in Texas. So that's the main rig. Super simple, super effective. I didn't come up with it. It's all over the internet, but I just want to include it from me to you in this video. That way you guys can learn something. If you have any questions, always feel free to ask. Hope you learned something. Hope you're enjoying this video. Let's get back to it.
The heat of Texas in August is nearly unbearable. The ground is bone dry and covered in fire ants, and what isn't is a sloppy mess of sticky mud that won't hesitate to consume any shoes that aren't on tight. We'd endured the heat for an entire week, but what we really needed was the fishing to get hot. Gar usually don't mind hot weather and warm water, but every species has its limits, and even the gar weren't cooperating at this point. For our last few days, we chose to target sharp bends in the river where the water is at its deepest. The extra depth in these areas is formed from the heavy flood currents slamming into the banks where the river changes direction, gouging out the earth and eliminating any sediment that may have had a chance to settle there. The deeper the river gets, the cooler the temperatures are down on the bottom. Because they are cold-blooded, these big fish seek out these areas as a way to regulate their body heat and get more comfortable, which makes them prime areas to drop down a bloody snack. Our last day was much like the days before it. Things started slow, and we managed to pick off a few juvenile fish to bide our time. With the minutes ticking away and only about an hour left in the day, it finally happened. We got the strong run we were looking for, and our long wait was finally worth it. Even though we were certain the fish we had on the line was the one I traveled all the way to Texas for, it was apparent that things were about to go sideways. The rivers of East Texas are littered with fallen trees and wood from past flooding, and alligator gar have a knack for swimming directly through them when they are on your line. That's exactly what our fish decided to do. We had to think and act fast as not to lose the fish we so desperately needed. Sometimes you can drop your rod and reel in the water and pass it through the wood, but this one was just too deep. Bryan grabbed the line on the other side where it was free, and I had to make the swift and critical decision to cut the line and retie it on the other side. There are few things as nerve-wracking as trying to tie a solid knot under pressure with a 100-pound fish on the other end of it, where at any moment they can bolt away and be gone forever. But we worked together quickly and once again had a solid connection to our beast. All I had to do now was set the hook and let the mayhem ensue.
I'll bring her over there to the right. Let her bump the tag, man.
Much like my previous alligator gar trips and many trophy fish adventures since, it always seems that we find the fish we are looking for at the very last minute, the last opportunity. In this case, we found a 6-foot Texas trophy alligator gar on the last day, at the last spot, in the final hour, before we were chased off the water by a fast-moving thunderstorm. We were muddy, sunburnt, and tired, but all in all, we were successful. And in the end, I got to spend a week with some pretty awesome people, and I'd consider that a win no matter what fish is caught.
I gotta have an ending to the video. Yeah.